As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission, I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain, keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah.
Good morning, everybody. I was smiling to myself because Seth has been on the show before, and Ravens probably may have seen the show before. But Leslie, I think this is your first time of being on this show, and I sense that you like that. You've never heard that song before. Is that fair to say?
I've watched the show and I've heard it, but I always got a bop to it.
Okay, well, even great. I don't mind. In this case, I don't mind being contradicted. I don't mind being contradicted at all. And I've been playing it for the last year and a half, but I just can't let it loose. You know, sometimes you can't let it loose. But we're pleased today in terms of talking about. Some people would say food insecurity. Some people would say food security for some, food security for all. But as far as I'm concerned, this food insecurity, security issue is not necessarily only a local, but a national and even international issue. But I digress. Enough of my sermonizing. But really pleased to have some people here that are really focused on in the trenches and working on this issue of food for all. And it really gives me great pleasure to have Seth Poole rejoining us. Seth is Director of Systems of Care at Clifford Beers. And I don't think he minds my saying a long-term resident in New Haven. Leslie Brown is with us. And Leslie is the community health organizer for Clifford Beers in the Hill North and downtown neighborhoods, but not exclusively. I'm sure, Leslie, that Seth and others kind of call upon you to kind of serve the universe, if not the whole city, in 24 hours, right? I mean, Leslie, go get it, do this.
Wherever is needed.
Where and in particular, specialized in terms of the topic of this show, Leslie specializes in nutrition and maternal health. She formerly worked as a nutritionist and a certified lactation consultant. If you're not sure what a certified lactation consultant is, we'll give you a hint. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit, Leslie, if we have time. But it's gold. It's gold. It's mother's gold, literally, or some might say mother's platinum or mother's Bitcoin, but mother's gold. And then Raven Blake, last but not least. Raven, how are you doing? Good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Tom?
Good morning, Raven. Raven is the founder of Love Fed New Haven, a member of the Northeast Farmers of Color Network, and also comes from a long lineage of Black farmers and creatives and entrepreneurs, and gets people that realize that the sustenance, that survival is important on so many levels. So welcome, everybody. Let's dive in. I mean, you hear this term, food security, food insecurity. So and sometimes it just rolls off people's lips without any sincere desire to solve the problem. You folks are on the line today because we're going to work on solving. We're going to enlist some solving and talk about some solutions. So anyone but Raven and then anyone else we can talk. But what is food insecurity? And not only that, but what are the different ways families in New Haven experience food insecurity? Raven, would you like to go first?
Sure. So food insecurity really just plainly is acknowledges the lack of access that people have to food in general. So if people are food insecure, then usually it's because of, they may be working class, or they may not have fresh and affordable foods around them. And they may be surrounded by corner stores and not like grocery stores where there's like more options as far as really nutritious, nutrient dense foods. So food insecurity is basically that, like not being, when families and people like are not secure and like don't have like food secureness, I guess. And food insecurity is really addressed in a lot of nonprofits the non-governmental organizations, but as well as governmental organizations. So there are federal programs that also help to address issues of food insecurity in particular, and especially food emergency, like emergency food systems,
Indeed.
which I think, you know, a lot of our federal and state funding goes to programs like that, and through a lot of philanthropy in the nonprofit industrial complex, the food insecurity gets addressed in many different aspects and cross sectors in those ways. But I also wanted to share a little bit about speaking of food insecurity, and that, you know, those really food insecurity is what gets more attention as far as like nonprofits and the government goes, and that takes up a large part of the conversation around food systems in general. But there's just so much more to the food system than what exists as emergency food systems and pantries and things like that. And so I also just want to address the terms of food apartheid and food sovereignty, food justice, which dig a little deeper and really talk about how complex food systems are, and how other like oppressive systems, such as like white supremacy and capitalism, can also impact Black, Indigenous, people of color, and just like poor people in general. So according, and this can be found on LoveFed's website, but for food apartheid, which is a term that people, it's still kind of new, and grassroots organizers have been using it more often. And based on this definition by Dar Cooper, is the systemic destruction of Black self-determination to control our food, including and resource theft and discrimination. It's a hypersaturation of destructive foods and predatory marketing and blatantly discriminatory corporate controlled food systems that result in our community suffering from some of the highest rates of heart disease and diabetes of all times. Many tend to use the term food desert. However, food apartheid is much more accurate representation of the structural racialized inequities perpetuated through our current system. And the term food apartheid was actually coined by Karen Washington, who is another like national food justice organizer. And she coined the term because deserts is really is a naturally occurring, a desert is a naturally occurring thing. And so we don't say food deserts because the inaccessibility that people have to food is not naturally occurring. It is actually because of these systems that we live in. And so, yeah, that's that. And then food justice in general, you know, intersects between addressing issues of food apartheid and mutual aid and community care, and working with nonprofits and government in order to get people the food that they need. So I'll stop there. And yeah,
Raven, come on! I was looking for another 40 minutes. You know,
well, we got plenty of time.
We got plenty of time. We got plenty of time. And Seth has to change diapers or do something. He has to do something today. So I know I really, in terms of your putting it into the global context, I got to be really upfront with you. My thought today before going on air was, indeed, food security is what's going on in Gaza and Israel right now today as we speak this moment. The food security issue. So I love the way you framed it. But Seth, maybe jump in and share the purpose. This show we're talking about so many as Raven has articulated so well. The various threads, the interconnectivity. So we could talk about international relations. You could talk about politics. You could talk about economics, all pertaining to how that impacts little old New Haven as well. So don't want to hamstring you in terms of your response to what you might want to say. Kind of elaborate on what Raven just mentioned.
Also, thank Raven for lifting up complexity. How it's so much of it that is intentional. Security exists when about families. Excel. Previous. It is people have had the means to provide this, do not proven to have 7. Just keep security. Typically a shared school system. Children. Access.
Access. Mhm. Mhm. Okay.
Ultimately. Versus
Mm. 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 Leslie, please let's weigh in. It's finally your time, Leslie. It's finally your time.
Thank you again for having me, and both for Raven and Seth for everything they've covered. Everything I really appreciate. Like Seth said, the complexities specific from food apartheid because it's entirely applicable. Important because like much of what we're talking about, and it is not certainly natural occurring, but it's going to take a lot of effort. When I think of, and I want to make sure you can hear me properly.
Well, I would say I think folks that are aware that this world of Zoom, nothing's perfect. So you're coming in and out. It's we're not going to stop. The shows are recorded. We can hear you. We can still hear you. But proceed, and everything is all good.
Okay, so for food insecurity, things that really always stand up for me, and again, it's been mentioned, is just that it's more than just a lack of food, but more specifically, a lack of consistent access to, as Raven mentioned, nutrient dense, healthy food, and also culturally appropriate foods for many of our populations. That not only is it difficult to maybe find or have a supermarket or a large grocery store with a grander variety by you, but specifically the foods that are culturally appropriate to your family, that you are familiar with, that you know how to cook and prepare and offer, and your children need all of that. And that's massive. That's also part of that. There are resources, many, there are resources out there to help those with food insecurity, but if the cultural sensitivity or appropriateness of it is not considered, there's going to be some populations that are still not going to get that. So that's important to consider as well. And I mean, I find in this conversation of food insecurity that families too often have to sacrifice the making the choice for healthy foods to choosing foods that will last them the month, or the 2 to 3 weeks. So the intent is there, but the ability, not just for that week or two, but for the whole month to feed the entire family, lies in maybe getting a bunch of options that are not healthy. And as a former WIC nutritionist, something that I can bring up that I my participants struggled with is, and in myself too, was, if their package, it would have a certain milk allowance for low fat milk, as is the suggested healthier option. But with being surrounded primarily by corner stores and not having access, either because of the location or transportation or whatever, to a grocery store, they would often go without their milk allowance because the corner stores often didn't have. And sure enough, there were two in the block that I worked, and I went myself to get low fat milk, and it wasn't there. It was just cold. So, and that's not to say all of them don't carry it, but that's just some options. I mean, I'm sure we can walk into many of them, and it'll, depending on the size, they may or may not have fresh fruits or vegetables, or again, something to consider. They might have fruits and vegetables, but the canned is with syrup or salt added to, your vegetables. And those are the options that unfortunately are going to, while give you some nutrients, it's also going to contribute to increasing the risk of other health concerns. And
Indeed.
so, and again, are not inexpensive. So you really have to consider whether this can is going to last you and your family for the month,
Right.
as opposed to the other not so.
We're going to move to tactics and strategies and what people can do. But before I get into that, I just want to ask, just as I hear Leslie and Raven and Seth talk, and we're also obviously we're going to talk about Embrace New Haven and Clifford Beers. But what about the mental? We know about hunger, what that means, but it seems to me people neglect and don't pay attention to the fact that there's mental issues that can kind of kick in. Physical wellness, just your whole, it's just not having a full belly. Raven, maybe talk about that a little bit.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Tom?
Sure. Want to kind of focus on the fact of mental and physical wellness, how this topic kind of impacts that. We sometimes we just neglect the fact, well, we might think it's just a full belly that we need, but there are residual and collateral damage that's taking place in the mental and physical space. Just wondered if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so many ways to answer this question. Okay, so but I think, and this is Mental Health Awareness Month, so I just want to acknowledge that too. But I think it's really there's so many different issues when it comes to when people are experiencing food insecurity and food apartheid, that takes a toll on their mental health, and not just their physical well-being. And it's not just about a full belly, just like you said. So because if you are even if you, let's say, never miss a meal, but you are mostly only have access to foods that aren't nutrient dense, and fresh, and I will say local or not, because that's another thing too, is kind of sometimes a conversation around what would create more equitable food systems, is that for everything to be hyper local. But we also live in the United States. We also live in a small city that's actually extremely diverse, with people from all over the world. And so when we're talking about culturally affirming foods, it's also we're not going to find we're never ever going to grow pineapples in Connecticut, unless global warming has another plan. But so it's really important for us to have localized food system to a point, but also be conscious of what is happening on the global level as well, especially with everything that is happening abroad, and especially with all of the oppression that's happening pertaining to folks in India right now, and especially farmers in India, for example. But if you are full with really foods that aren't good for you on a regular basis, that really does also impact your mental health. But I think also, just for example, gardening on a regular basis with community, especially, is an activity that also helps people to commune together. But even when you're doing it alone, It helps a lot with your mental health, your physical health, but just being active, but also cultivating food as well, cultivating food and cultivating community. But there have been many studies that are available that talk about when the really terrible school food that exists in public school systems, and that have proven that even when kids are, so yes, it's important that the kids are fed, but of course it's also just as important, if not more important, like just as important that like children have the nutritious food that they need in order to get through the school day, and to be functioning at the level that is expected of them in the school in school. So that really does, when kids aren't eating foods that are good for them, that also does impact their mental health and their behavior. And that's really important to consider, and that often gets glossed over too much. And if it's true for children and we're not feeding them the foods that they need while they're still developing, I mean, it's definitely the same for adults as far as eating well. And I'm not saying like I'm not one of those people that advocates for the super hypercritical like vegan, that's the only way to do it, raw foods only, and anything like that, because once again, culturally affirming foods and culturally affirming means something different to each person, and it's up to those people to determine what those foods are. But it does mean, I mean, yes, like more fruits and vegetables and generally things like that, legumes, etc. That all contribute to like the whole spectrum of foods available that help us to be functioning, including helping our brains to function in the ways that they need to in order to get through work, get through life, get through, being in relationship with one another.
Indeed, indeed. And Seth, just before I come to you about the, Clifford Beers has been really instrumental in kind of fighting this battle. And if I'm going to ask you to share some of what's in your toolkit in that regard, and also what's going on with the city of New Haven and perhaps in other organizations to address foods and insecurity. But before I do, Leslie, I just wonder whether you'd like to kind of piggyback or comment on what Raven has shared with us.
I did. Thank you. I mean, I think to put it simply,
Sorry.
well, food is, I think it's no coincidence that if we see rates of grades and success, wealthy communities lower, because as opposed to those in low income. Because if we don't have food, the children, and all of us, but the children don't have the energy to properly function, including starting with focus. I mean, it's we've heard it and we hear it. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, not just a meal, but a full meal to provide them, and with all of the nutrients they need. And all the importance of healthy foods doesn't just mean some healthy food. Variety plays a big role. That's why a variety of foods and vegetables, fruits and vegetables and other foods are important, because each and every one has a different amount or quantity of a certain mineral or vitamin, and we need a variety in order to get our fill of all of them. So a conversation I was having with a colleague the other day was that in my household and in many, we were relatively poor, but my mom, she covered it as much as she could. But now that I know, it was a struggle. And for a lot of low-income households, you get the basics, right? You get the apples, the bananas, maybe the oranges, and if it's a really good couple of weeks, some grapes, some strawberries. But that's often about where it's limited, because, and a small handful of the vegetables as well, because those are the ones that are more accessible most of the time, or on sale, or not as expensive. So the variety of vitamins and minerals are not as easily accessed, and they all play a role in our brain functioning and our all of our different organs and how our body works and what it needs and how we grow and learn and progress. And so food insecurity has a massive impact on one's mental and physical health. I mean, stress has been proven to have major impacts in our mental health, including, of course, anxiety, depression, but also heart disease, among other things. So it immediately affects our mental health in those ways, especially when it's chronic. If a parent or family has to consistently think about how they're going to feed their family, that is a form of chronic stress that is directly related to both mental and physical health. Just as um, um, under eating, so not enough food, and poor eating will be linked to other medical conditions. You have your diabetes and your hypertension and your obesity, or even anemia, or many other things that unfortunately we see in our communities. So food insecurity has a very direct impact to both.
Tremendous, tremendous. Lift us up. We've set the stage. I think we talked about some of the obstacles, and these are not things to smile at. These are real serious, real deal dilemmas. But I'm really so glad to do this show and to share with people how Clifford Beers and other agencies in the city of New Haven are kind of attempting to rise to the challenge, and some might say even succeeding in the challenge. So share with us.
Definitely, thanks, Tom and Raven. Our food is at which framed it as energy. Fire to get through and keep it moving. To be in a city proud of response, half of security, accessibility, definitely words were not response to they, efforts that prior to totally prepared for scale. I definitely hit my city of care, other new folks have come by a little bit more. This says that for the Clifford Beer, more than happy to be partnership. We take a very holistic care of center service. Understand that social there are geographical aspects. Taking account, you have to where they are. Clifford Beer prides itself on opening up dialogue around social. What is it to already folks literally sacrificing medication in favor of sacrificing rent, making the rental payment instead of these are aspects capitalism not setting the stage to see Clifford Beer's approach, providing several of our directly with provide specifically X funding, allows for give a gift card, stop and shop. Families talk about the other
Mhm.
because they're important to me. Even because you can't make assumptions
Mhm.
in to your what regard. You know, you don't have to open further to fully understand health are hereditary.
Mhm.
Is it something that they've been dealing with for generations? They're not even acknowledging some of the issues, dealing with so much more directly palpable.
Mhm.
Addiction is on your door, seemingly a lot more important than
Mhm.
family and found. It's tough on the fact that
Mhm.
giving this share that with that's
Before, that's really important. And before I ask everyone, because you referenced that the families, and there are some things that families, but that all of us can do, whether we're experiencing food insecurity or not. So I want to open up that question to everyone. But before I do, Beth, I just wonder whether there are maybe one or two more ways that different beers on the battlefield in terms of uh, fighting this battle in terms of
oh
specific program.
definitely.
So this is. I'll, I'll give you a minute. I'll give you a minute for a few
That's
shout
all
outs.
right. I'll take a minute.
Thank
Uh,
you. I'll give you 2 minutes.
so in addition to flex funding, obviously we have a very well versed in landscape for the food, who is part of our food assistance in the
Mhm.
community, providing direct referrals to food, something a part of care coordination.
Mhm.
Care coordination that fact that trusted person who helps me navigate complexities, care, health care,
Right.
mental health. They don't vacuum.
Yeah.
So today, odds are other things put people all too often folks what the reasons are in
Right.
their community.
Right.
And the person who access pantry, there are two or three of them, and some of them are very close to New Haven, like but they're not available. Where do they go? Also, the churches
Mhm.
that we were providing. Christ Chapel, that was that's the type of thing that the people about or their community out and celebrate. Hope sure that is
So from a knowledge standpoint, you guys are collecting that really vital information, and then you're sharing it. And so how can they kind of find out the key to the box, the key to the cheese? How can they find out about some of the offerings that Clifford Beer is involved with?
well our most access point is our warm line. Folks could call in the warm line express very well listening source to connect them with.
Right.
So that they could directly out to become part of care coordination.
Mhm.
Because often folks don't out and say part of services by referral. First referral. Necessarily.
Definitely. Excellent.
Issues that
Excellent.
family.
And Seth, I'm going to come back to you about Embrace New Haven, because it's really important for people to understand that it's an Embrace New Haven concept, structure, commitment, and collective energy is something that people need to not only know, because it's going to be profit. This is going to be a profitable knowledge to kind of find out about and join in terms of Embrace New Haven. But I want to throw out to everyone, because Seth kind of alluded to it, but Leslie and Raven, what can people experiencing food insecurity do right now from your perspective? What can people do that might have issues pertaining to their survival? What can they do right now? And Raven, I'll start with you.
I would say something that they can definitely do is, check out Clifford Beers, just as an organization and the resources that y'all provide, because it's only been in recent years that I've even learned of those resources as well. Usually there's good information provided by the New Haven Food Policy Council. And if folks sign up for that weekly newsletter, or not weekly, sorry, monthly newsletter, usually there are resources pertaining to what's available for folks across New Haven in food drives, et cetera, if any nonprofits are doing anything. I would also say for people to reach out and look and follow Common Ground High School. It's an amazing local urban agriculture focused high school in New Haven. And I mean, 2 weekends ago, I got seedlings there for my garden space, right? And so they not only provide seedlings, but through the pandemic, when organizations I work for partnered with them to mobilize for mutual aid and redistributing foods that were going to go in the trash, other perfectly fine foods that were going to go in the trash otherwise. Redistributing food that we rescued from Common Ground in particular, and they were providing an emergency CSA for families of students that they could identify throughout last year. And so, but there's also actually, and then Seth has more information about a couple other organizations I know too. But people have really mobilized, especially through the pandemic. And I think what's beautiful is that because of the pandemic, more information, more collaboration, and more information has become accessible. And hopefully it maintains and grows and to be sustainable, but also accessible, not just in word of mouth. I think word of mouth has definitely just always been the way that people have found out about information through their faith centers or just other kind of community events, but also digitally and things like that. I think part of the what's going to make a lot of things better in the future is just like making information open source. I'll pass it on to Leslie or Seth.
Hey, Les, it's been passed on to you. It's been lovingly and nurturingly and wisdom like passed on to you by Raven Blake.
Both. I mean, a lot of what Raven said is what I would cover. And Seth, I would start, well, actually, as a former work nutritionist, I really want to shout out to all those pregnant women, postpartum women up to 6 months, and children, infants up to age 5. There are 4 local WIC agencies that you can call to register and receive, check your eligibility and receive benefits. The resource page on the cliffordbeers.org website has a very extensive list of resources for food access, in as well as even calling 211. Actually, going to 211 online has a food pantry listing where you can just put your zip code and it gives you all the list, all the local food pantries. There's a mobile food pantry. Organizations, local organizations, please check out your local organizations like Christian Community Action on Hill has a food pantry and has a lot of resources for their locals. Community members, Fish, like I said, WIC, their food drives, including tomorrow, Camden is hosting a food drive at Mitchell, Hamden Middle School. And at 2623 Dixwell Avenue. So, and there, periodically there are food distributions throughout the city or the cities that folks can take advantage of. And like that said, always for any questions, concerns, not 211, certainly reach out Connecticut, which is 844-TALK-4CT. That's our warm line. Really can find they need.
Seth, let's take about 8 or 9 minutes and talk about Embrace New Haven. I don't want you to feel rushed. And then Raven and Leslie, I'll give you a chance for some closing remarks. But Seth, people have heard, they may not have heard, but they will hear. In some ways, they may not ever even hear what Embrace New Haven is, but they will feel the effects of Embrace New Haven's existence in terms of making things more equitable here in New Haven. So there are people with people kind of what's cooking in that regard. And it's really, I'm just so proud to be associated with this movement. It's not the Seth movement, it's the Embrace New Haven movement. So share with people.
Oh, no. Definitely much larger than myself. Platform. Embrace New Haven is something has not existed this way. I've been an organization's partner in order to serve the ultimately at the core of what's happening in Embrace New Haven. Basically have cured for the MS for Medicaid services level, basically Havens specifically individual. So what they want is to do specifically are receive or chip, take a strengths-based approaching and giving them access. So particular food insecurity rise to naturally in particular. So what can we keep the central have to take an approach, puts them as the experts, put around them resources, whatever help or order to improve their collective family.
And Seth, tell us about time. Are you pressured? Do you have, is this a one-off? What's the
So
length?
A one-off? No, I wouldn't call it a one-off because we're kind of, this is our third EMS award. This has received previous one, wraparound, wraparound, which essentially does the same thing. But this aims to also tie in compensation for organizations receive directly chasing after grants. And
So there's an incentive for collaboration.
there isn't. Last year and this year are following 5 are expected over the course of expected to pivot, expected to find out certain best practices. They are magnificent. Let's stay that.
Mhm.
So state level partners, local level partners, how do we tie together for the bit? But we were actually
Mhm.
so addition to
Yeah.
show out is our
Seth, what's your sense thus far? And again, Leslie and Raven, I will give you a chance for your closing remarks. But Seth, what is your sense? Because I hope people heard clearly that you've been working with state organizations, local organizations, nonprofits, community organizations, people, all of our tribes, all of our institutional tribes and our cultural tribes. Are you sensing that people that understand the sense of urgency right now, that we can no longer kind of just sit and talk, but we must walk the walk?
Yes, definitely. There's an urgency. There's an optimism.
Hmm.
There's, it's like there's opportunity as well to work smarter but not harder, but coming from tribes, like you said,
Mhm.
because there's a lot of overlap state and how those are and how about achieving them through Grace New Haven, created Care for Kids, okay, has opened up a lot of those eyes, a lot of light bulb speak. It's our second. So yes, it is very much urgency. People are feeling urgency. Highest to the folks who
Hmm.
are experiencing it. This pandemic, a lot of land.
Mhm.
So people are have to get aware. Obviously aware.
And you've extended your net far and wide, but and so I'm tempted not to ask this question, but I just want to ask it anyway. There might be one organization or two organizations out here that haven't heard about Embrace New Haven, but they might want to get involved. Is there still an opportunity for them to explore how they could collaborate
Oh,
with you?
yes, there is. Thank you for that question, Tom. That was a question. We have our partnership, which consists actually signed on this award, Security Award. There's a lot of executive directors, state representation, part of our second organizing. Seeking involvement, folks.
Excellent. Excellent.
So I can,
Please.
so right now, pretty all heard.
Excellent.
So start the dialogue.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
just getting
Excellent.
the word
Excellent.
out.
Excellent. Leslie, let me give you another 60 seconds or so, and Raven, I'll have you close us out. And Raven, you just keep on talking until Harry plays the music, then we'll note, then people won't be able to hear the music. So you can keep on talking, but they're not going to hear you. They'll see your lips move. But Leslie, share with us kind of your closing thoughts.
Well, for one, I'm grateful, here. Really, I just want to say there are so many resources out there. I find the best way is come together as a community and resources and organizations like and as Seth said, the clients and are and that really our children and everyone to get the vitamins and minerals served and starts with access. So make some structural changes there.
Excellent. And Raven, maybe in your remarks, share with us a little bit about Love Fed, if you don't mind.
Yes, Love Fed was a fiscally sponsored project that I was running between 2018 and earlier this year, and no longer running it as a project anymore. But we donated garden beds to people who did not have access to community garden spaces or had never grown their food before. And this was for people who owned homes, but mostly for people who did not and did not have access to green spaces. We also did food justice events and cultural events around food and intersecting with art and including food justice visioning workshops and gathering people to imagine what better food systems look like for their community and for themselves. So what I look forward to look forward as far as like food access is really, I think, more things like culturally cross-intersecting arts, culture, dollars from like that go to addressing in a more cultural way ways that people can get involved in order to really contribute in impactful ways what they can do to help change their food systems for the better. I think it's amazing the different initiatives that Clifford Beards is doing and the city of New Haven is doing around food. And I also am really interested in seeing what ways creatively that we can engage community members in those conversations to help shape the change that needs to take place. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, guys. Let's see if I can squeeze in one more. Raven, the Northeast farmers, what's cooking with that? I mean, I think people need to know this is not something just happening on Dixwell or the Hill or Dixwell. I mean, this is happening globally also, but Northeast farmers, give us a little soundbite about.
Yeah, Northeast Farmers of Color is a network that works with Black, Indigenous, and people of color throughout the Northeast entirely to help, and it's really helping people to get a land. So helping to put lands in the hand of BIPOC farmers and through collectively or individually but really reallocating land so that we can actually return to the land, farming, and not just for food, but also for textiles and other things like that. And it's an amazing initiative. Oh, there we go.
The next show, that's the next show. Come back.
Thank you.
As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah.